Thank you all for coming to our book talk series, Book That Changed Me, or Books That Changed Me. Today our presenter is Johan Delton. We're very glad to have him. For a couple of bookkeeping things at the beginning. If you have, I think there were surveys on your desks. You can have a pencil. Take notes on them if you like, but if you do the survey, please leave it here so we can find out what we can do and how we can improve the book talks. We are doing these on a monthly basis, so I invite you to come back again and leave the surveys either on the desk or at your up here or at your desks. Have a treat on your way out, or right now if you'd like. We'll get started. For my little introduction to what this series is that part of the reason we are here is to expand our minds. And a couple of ways that can happen is either learning from others or learning from books. And books can entertain, inform, and inspire us. And sometimes we come across a book that challenges our thinking or expands our minds in new ways. What do we do when we find a book like that? We've created this series in the library to help with that question by inviting a few faculty members to share an experience that they had with a book and giving you time for some questions and answers. Today's presenter is Johan Delton. The book that changed him is The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. Brother Delton earned his PhD in applied social psychology. Born in France, he attended Catholic schools throughout his early education. He now serves as a professor at Brigham Young University, Idaho, where he directs the Department of Psychology. So, turn the time over to Brother Delton.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So you may have heard of another book called Jesus the Christ by James E. Talmage. And if you've ever read in there, it's older English. This is what this book is. It's about the same timeline. So I'm going to read some, and we can interact with it if you would like. But what this book did for me was obviously interesting to me and changed me in quite a few ways. When I started reading it, I realized the variety of experience that you and I have with God. I also realized that God speaks with whomever he would like. I'd like to remind persons sometimes that God, when he spoke with Joseph, Joseph was not a member of the church. And I can see that he speaks with people. The other thing I noticed is I got interested in the writers that were of that era. David Thoreau, if you're familiar with him. Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Gandhi, etc. And I started to realize that they read each other. Something I didn't know until I read those books. So Mahatma Gandhi, if you're familiar with him, read this book and learned some things about the still small voice, how to approach spirituality. Tolstoy also wrote that book. When I read these people, I can see that they're wanting to elevate humanity. Quite often they do it very well. And that's what this book has done for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start reading some pieces of it. You might get a slight French accent through because I'm tired at the end of the day. But they will work out. I always like the idea of reading books because textbooks really take a specific take on a book. And when you read it in the original, you always find more. And then you find things also that are different. And that's what has happened. William James was a psychologist / philosopher. He was at Harvard. And they've always been members of our church at Harvard, actually, for a long time. And he got interested in this question of God. And he was president of the American Psychological Association twice, not in a row. And he started a division in the American Psychological Association called the Psychology of Religion, and it's still there today. And I think it's amazing that we can talk about religion in a psych course. And so he would be one of our founders. He's one of the few psychologists who created kind of the homegrown kind of psychology for the United States. Typically, when we talk about psychology, we have to go to Europe, which is okay. But I've been there long enough that sometimes I need a break. So William James was a good break for me with a very resourceful kind of psychology that I could relate to. So he talks about conversion. He brings other authors into it, and he quotes them as well. And so I'm going to read just a paragraph, and he tries to explain what conversion means. To be converted, to be regenerated, to receive grace, to experience religion, to gain assurance are so many phrases which denote the process, gradual or sudden, by which a self, hitherto divided and consciously wrong, inferior, and unhappy, becomes unified and consciously right and superior and happy, in consequence of its firmer hold upon religious realities. This, at least, is what conversion signifies in general terms, whether or not we believe that a direct divine operation is needed to bring such a moral change about. I don't think I know of a different experience in human life that is as strong as conversion. It is still the best predictor in humanity of whether a person will recidivate into addiction or into maladaptive behavior. Conversion changes people like nothing else I know. So I'm going to read a little more. Something you may have noticed, he mentions two kinds of conversions already. One that is gradual and one that is rapid. And he says that the end of it is the same, it's conversion. So the path that you and I are on doesn't matter as much, apparently, with all the accounts that he's gotten. What has mattered is that people have changed through that conversion. So I'm going to read the experience of a person, and it's going to be just a paragraph, although there are 5 of them that continue after that. I thought I saw the Savior by faith in human shape for about 1 second in the room, with arms extended, appearing to say to me, "Come." The next day I rejoiced with trembling. Soon after, my happiness was so great that I said that I had wanted to die. This world had no place in my affections as I knew of, and every day appeared as solemn to me as the Sabbath. I had an ardent desire that all mankind might feel as I did. I wanted to have them all love God supremely. Previous to this time, I was very selfish and self-righteous, but now I desire the welfare of all mankind, and could with a feeling heart forgive my worst enemy. And I felt as if I should be willing to bear the scoffs and snares of any person, and suffer anything for his sake, if I could be the means, in the hands of God, of the conversion of one soul. Some of those words will sound familiar to you. He continues by explaining the conversion process, and that's what's been fascinating, because he calls that the psychology of self-surrender. And he's noticing that a lot of that was quite familiar to a group of people living in New England, where religion was, I guess they were passionate. I think I've met that kind of passion when I was in Louisiana. They're very passionate about Jesus over there, and I just love that. It was fantastic. So the northern states, northeast. So this is what William James says. Now there may be great oscillations in the emotional interest, and the hot place may shift before one almost as rapidly as the sparks that ran through burnt paper. Then we have the wavering and divided self we hear so much of in the previous lecture. I'm hitting lecture 10, but there's quite a few of them in there, where it goes through different sometimes types of religion. Sometimes he will take a subcomponent of religion and explore it. So this one happens to be conversion. Thus we have the wavering and divided self we hear so much in the previous lecture, or the focus of the excitement and heat, the point of view from which the aim is taken, may come to lie permanently within a certain system, and then if the change be a religious one, we can call it a conversion, especially if it be a crisis or sudden. Let us hereafter, in speaking of the hot place in a man's consciousness, the group of ideas to which he devotes himself and from which he works, call it the habitual center of his personal energy. It makes a great difference to a man whether one set of his ideas or another be the center of his energy, and it makes a great difference as regard to any sets of ideas which he may possess, whether they become central or remain peripheral to him. What I see here is you and I have beliefs, things that we hold dear. And the question becomes, are those peripheral? Are they like satellite and we have something else in our minds that's center? But apparently when conversion happens, those ideas that used to be satellite become center. They become the meaning of how you interpret the world. To say that a man is converted means in these terms that religious ideas previously peripheral in his consciousness now take a central place, and that religious aims form the habitual center of his energy. Now, if you ask of psychology just how the excitement shifts in a man's mental system and why aims that were peripheral become at a certain moment central, psychology has to reply that although it can give a general description of what happens, she's unable in a given case to account accurately for all the single forces at work. That's because typically, generally, psychology wants to know what happens to a human being on average. Conversion is never average, so it becomes what I call a case study. It's more qualitative. In a later chapter, he will merge psychology with religion. But here he sees some of the difficulty that a person in psychology may have in wanting to study what conversion means in a person. So let me tell you the typical framework that they've understood. And by framework, I mean a typical person to whom a conversion may happen or may occur. In his recent work on the psychology of religion, Professor Starbuck of California has shown by a statistical inquiry how closely parallel in its manifestation the ordinary conversion which occurs in young people brought up in evangelical circles is to that growth into a larger spiritual life, which is a normal phase of adolescence. In every class of human beings, the age is the same, falling usually between 14 and 17. The symptoms are the same: a sense of incompleteness, imperfection, brooding, depression, morbid introspection. None that has ever happened to you as a teenager. A sense of sin, anxiety about the hereafter, distress, over doubts, and the like. And the result is the same: a happy relief and objectivity, as the confidence in self gets greater through the adjustments of the faculties to the wider outlook. So apparently in evangelical circles, this was common in the youth at that time. And you kind of get the era of when that was happening, which is quite interesting. Hi, Bayerbold.
Hello.
How you doing?
Doing great. Good to see you.
Glad to have you. Conversion in its essence, a normal adolescent phenomenon, incidental to the passage from a child's small universe to the wider intellectual and spiritual life of maturity. That phrase alone changed me quite a bit because I understood that intellectuality and spirituality are not necessarily to be dissociated, put apart, but that it is a sign of a life of maturity. I don't know that many academics would call conversion maturity today. It just depends on the kind of academic, I would assume. But I really appreciate William James understanding that it does center a person. If you have thoughts or questions, I would welcome them. I'm going to keep reading because there's a lot of this that I really like. We're doing okay? Yeah.
Can you repeat? Maybe I missed it. What is a peripheral belief?
So the periphery and the centrality had to do with the topic of your beliefs, the ones that are religious, whether they are peripheral or, in other words, they're not quite centered to what you care about. You use them maybe as a custom, culture, habit, but you have not internalized that into a conversion. Central, it's when it's the matter, like when you wake up, that's what you think about.
Thank you.
Yeah. More thoughts? All right. I'm going to read the example of a person who struggled with drunkenness. I use the old term. And you will see what has happened to him. And that came from the studies of the psychology of religious phenomena in the American Journal of Psychology. The American Journal of Psychology, it was printed in 1896, is still the top journal in our field. It's the journal that will look at philosophy, ideas, changes, kind of what's happening in the field, and it's always very good quality. One Tuesday evening, I sat in a saloon in Harlem, homeless, friendless, dying drunkard. I had pawned and sold everything that would bring a drink. I could not sleep unless I was dead drunk. I had not eaten for days, and for 4 nights preceding, I had suffered with delirium tremens and the horrors from midnight till morning. So, I'm not happy. I had often said, I will never be a tramp. I will never be cornered, for when that time comes, if it ever comes, I will find a home at the bottom of the river. I think he would bring himself to that. But the Lord so ordered that when that time came, I was not able to walk 1/4 of the way to the river. As I sat there thinking, I seemed to feel some great and mighty presence. I did not know then what it was. I did learn afterward that it was Jesus, the sinner's friend. And I like that as well. Very often when you and I sin, it feels like Jesus is not going to listen because we have messed up. My belief has changed partly because of this. In my experience, obviously, is when he reaches out probably even more. Is when you and I sin, he wants to have us out. I walked up to the bar and pounded it with my fist till I made the glasses rattle. Those who stood by drinking looked on with scornful curiosity. I said I would never take another drink. I'm sure in bars, maybe that phrase has been said a lot. I just have to assume. If I died on the street and I really felt as though that would happen before morning, something said, if you want to keep this promise, go and have yourself locked up. So I went to the nearest station house and I had myself locked up. There you can start to hear the still small voice in that man, in the depths of his weakness. I was placed in a narrow cell, and it seemed as though all the demons that could find room came in that place with me. And this was not all the company I had either. No, praise the Lord. That dear spirit that came to me in the saloon was present and said, pray. Don't. And you have the exact same phrase in Dostoevsky and Brother Karamazov. This idea of praying. I did pray, and though I did not feel any great help, I kept on praying. Maybe that sounds familiar. As soon as I was able to leave my cell, I was taken to the police court and was remanded back to the cell. I was finally released and found my way to my brother's house, where every care was given to me. While lying in bed, the admonishing spirit never left me. And when I arose the following Sabbath morning, I felt that the day would decide my fate. And towards evening, it came to my head to go to Jerry O'Malley's mission, and I went. The house was packed, and with great difficulty, I made my way to the space near the platform, and there I saw the apostle to the drunkard, the outcast, a man of God. He rose and, amid deep silence, told his experience. So there was a serenity about this man that carried conviction with it. And I found myself saying, I wonder if God can save me. I listened to the testimony of 25 to 30 other persons, every one of whom had been saved from rum. And I made up my mind that I would be saved or die right there. And when the invitation was given, I knelt down with a crowd of drunkards. Jerry made the first prayer, then Miss O'Malley prayed fervently for us. Oh, what conflict was going on in my poor soul. A blessed whisper said, come. The devil said, be careful. I halted but a moment, and then, with a breaking heart, I said, dear Jesus, can you help me? Never with mortal tongue can I describe that moment. Although up to that moment my soul had been filled with indescribable gloom, I felt the glorious brightness of the noonday sunshine into my heart. I felt I was a free man. Oh, the precious feeling of safety, of freedom, of resting on Jesus. I felt that Christ, with all his brightness and power, had come into my life, that indeed all things had passed away, and all things had become new. From that moment till now, I have never wanted a drink of whiskey. I have never seen money enough to make me take one. I promised God that night that if he would take away that appetite for strong drink, I would work for him all my life. He has done his part, and I have been trying to do mine. Anything comes to your mind as I read this person's conversion? Any curiosity or similarity that you see? I assume the words that I read sound somewhat familiar to you.
That reminds me of Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
He prays because all the darkness is descending upon him.
Yeah.
He cries out, and the Lord is with him in that moment.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Thank you. Something that changed me in that particular story is the blessed whisper, come. And then the devil's whisper, be careful. So I've been looking in my own life when I get a prompting. I've started to notice that they come in pairs. And so I have the genuine desire to help, and right after it is, hey, I've got to do this, and this. And I take the second too often. But yeah, so that changed how I actually am aware and careful of what I believe is the still small voice. And all you'll have to understand, I'm still in psychology, which is amazing to me. Because in modern textbooks, I don't hear those things. That's why I like books, y'all. Y'all need to get a hold of some books. Let's see. William James talks about Tolstoy, and then he gives two warnings to those of us who want to take the path of faith, which I think were quite interesting and have helped me quite a bit. The first warning, some persons, for instance, never are or possibly never under any circumstance could be converted. And it's not that they can't, he'll say that a little bit later. But religious ideas cannot be the center of their spiritual energy. And then he explains why. He explains why. They may be excellent persons, servants of God in practical ways, but they are not children of his kingdom. They are either incapable of imagining the invisible, or else, in the language of devotion, they are lifelong subject of barrenness and dryness. That's kind of mean. Such inaptitude for religious faith may, in some case, be intellectual in its origin. That's his first warning. Their religious faculties may be checked in their natural tendency to expand by belief about the world that are inhibitive, the pessimistic and materialistic belief, for example, within so many good souls who in former times would have freely indulged in their religious propensities, find themselves nowadays as if it were frozen. And I have seen this frozen with persons I have known who have emphasized the intellectual over the experiential when it comes to God. The intellectual, I think, is useful, and I will use it whenever it points to God. But at some point, we have to go beyond. We have to surrender. And that surrendering can be inhibited by the desire of the intellect to control, even self-control. So psychology today will have the word self-control, self-esteem, self-fulfilling prophecy, self-actualization, self to no end. This kind of psychology asks for the self to be surrendered. So this kind of psychology is not super great news to modern psychology, certain types of modern psychology. Self-help books, a lot of self going on. He continues, or the agnostic vetoes upon faith as something weak and shameful, under which so many of us today lie cowering, afraid to use our instincts. In many persons, such inhibitions are never overcome. To the end of their days, they refuse to believe their personal energy never gets to its religious center, and the latter remains inactive in perpetuity. In other words, we remain the center of our own lives instead of letting Christ take over, which would be conversion. Second, in other persons, the trouble is profounder. They are people anesthetic in their religious side, deficient in that category of sensibility. Just as a bloodless organism can never, in spite of all its goodwill, attain to the reckless animal spirit enjoyed by those of sanguine temperament. I told you it sounded like Talmage, Jesus the Christ. So hopefully it makes sense. So the nature which is spiritually barren may admire and envy faith in others, but can never encompass the enthusiasm and peace which those who are temperamentally qualified for faith enjoy. All this may, however, turn out eventually to have been a matter of temporary inhibition, and hopefully it is. But here he's pointing out to those of us who admire the faith in others. And so we put them on a pedestal and potentially have a tendency for worship for those people. So that's when we put perhaps Book of Mormon on a pedestal, Ruth on a pedestal, as in she had her faith and that's never going to be mine to an extent. And so you cut yourself short as if you're saying, Jesus, you're not incredible enough to make me a new creature. I will tell you the limits. That's very presumptuous, of course. But be careful of worshiping other people's faith. That's what I got from this. Even late in life, some thaw, which is amazing. Some release may take place, some bolts be shocked back into the bareness breast, and the man's hard heart may soften and break into religious feeling. Such cases, more than any other, suggest the idea that sudden conversion is by miracle. So long as they exist, we must not imagine ourselves to deal with irretrievably fixed classes. So he never says you're stuck. It just says sometimes you choose to be. And for some of us, it's a lifelong choice. So the two warnings. One is be careful with intellectuality, use it for good. And then be careful in worshiping other people's faith, because then you will not think it could be you. So what I've gained from this and this book is when I read the scriptures now, I look at the scriptures as an extension of my spiritual lesson. And I do that because then I can see who I can become on the evil side as much as on the good side, because I am all potentially these people that I read about. So he talks about the volitional type, which is those of us who choose to work a conversion. We are on our path, if you will, and the type by self-surrender, which is more set, and you'll see parallels to that in the Book of Mormon with Alma and Yamilik teaching persons who have been made to be humble and those who choose to be humble. And you'll see it's very similar in this book. Thoughts, questions, ideas? Yeah. So let me tell you a little bit more about self-surrender. I will therefore hurry to the latter, The more so because the difference between the two types is, after all, not radical. That's because the end result is the same, which is conversion. Even in the most voluntary build-up sort of regeneration, there are passages of partial self-surrender interposed. And in the great majority of all cases, when the will has done its utmost towards bringing one close to the complete unification aspired after, it seems that the very last step must be left to the other forces and performed without the help of its activity. In other words, self-surrender becomes then indispensable. The personal will, says Dr. Starbuck, must be given up. In many cases, relief persistent refuses to come until the person ceases to resist and to make an effort in the direction he desires to go. That's the self-surrender of your personal will. That's part of your prized possession, your ego. Right? When you and I are angry, it's typically our ego that's angry. When you and I want something, that's our ego who wants something. And this had me think a little deeper into my life of what my ego means, right? When somebody addresses the ego and compliments it, or when somebody addresses my ego and don't compliment it, it goes the other way. Tries to take it down. How does the ego respond, and why is the ego the center, and should it be? According to conversion, it shouldn't. The ego should be self-surrendered to Christ. And that would make for a religious life, if that were to be the case. It could be the case that the ego is the most dangerous person you'll ever come across. That's the only person I know who will keep you from returning to God. It's your ego. Satan does not have that power. I think that's the most dangerous thing you've ever come across. And that's why I would want you to entertain surrendering it to Christ. It is too dangerous, y'all, potentially. So this is what is said in terms of how do you let go. That's very hard to do, since this perhaps is our prized possession. Starbuck seems to put the finger on the root of the matter when he says that to exercise the personal will is still to live in the region of the imperfect self, where the thing is most emphasized, where, on the contrary, the subconscious force takes the lead. It is more probably the better self in pause, which directs the operation. Instead of being clumsy and vaguely aimed at from without, it is itself the organizing center. So this is where I think that really matters to me. This is what he says. What then must a person do? He must relax, says Dr. Starbuck. That is, he must fall back on the larger power which makes for righteousness, which has been welling up in his own being, and let it finish in its own way the work it has begun. The act of yielding, in this point of view, is giving oneself over to the new life, making it the center of a new personality, and living from within the truth of which had before been viewed objectively or on the periphery. Man's extremity is God's opportunity. And then he goes on. Men's extremity is God's opportunity. If you put that on churchofjesuschrist.org, you'll see it's been quoted at General Conference a couple times. And it's quite good. Any thoughts on that? This act of yielding and letting go. Yes, 2 thoughts.
I was just thinking about how like self-surrendering can seem really scary because I think a lot of life is figuring out who you are and then surrendering that and being okay with God maybe saying, you need to change this. It can be scary, but then if you realize he's changing you to be better, it's going to be a lot better and it's going to be something that you'll be comfortable with.
I think I agree with that. I think you and I are a very hard time figuring out who we are. I don't personally think we can do it by ourselves. It's going to be a never-ending mess. Yeah, thank you.
I know one modern preacher who said that we approach the altar of God and we leave on it all of our hopes, our fears, everything we've come to love, everything that we want. We bow meekly in humble submission and then we slowly walk away.
Thank you. Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much. Let me read a little bit more because I haven't read enough tonight, apparently. This is another person, 26th of March, 1775. So it's an older account than when they got it together. As I was about sunset, wandering in the fields, lamenting my miserable, lost, and undone condition, and almost ready to sink in under my burden, I thought I was in such a miserable case as never any person was before. I returned to the house, and when I got to the door, just as I was stepping off the threshold, the following impression came into my mind like a powerful but small, still voice. You have been seeking, praying, performing, and then the still small voice keeps teaching that person. Maybe I'll read the whole thing, but the small, still voice, this is where Mahatma Gandhi picked up the understanding of the small, still voice. When he was in India, that country got cut in three by the UK. That became Bangladesh and Pakistan, and all those of us who were Muslims were pushed outside of India towards those two countries. That created a lot of anger and a lot of burned villages, people doing horrible things to each other. So Gandhi would actually go to a village and try and calm them down, and was usually successful. And he was asked by a reporter, like, how do you know which village to go to? Because there's so many. And he just said, the still small voice. And to me, that was powerful when I read that. And then I go, where did he get that? So I started to read him, and then he started telling the books he read, and that came out. I'm like, okay, I'm reading that one to figure that out. After this, we can have a greater discussion on conversion, but I just wanted to read some of the end part of this. In none of these cases is the revelation distinctly motor. In the case of Julius Smith, who had prophetic revelations innumerable in addition to the revealed translation of the gold plates, which resulted in the Book of Mormon, I'm saddened that this is not going to be printed in my side books. It's like, this is good. He was actually familiar with members of the church, one of whom became an apostle. So they had a lot of back and forth, and he actually shared some of his original works, which are still at church headquarters. And church sent him a full set of works as well, but he died soon after. But let me read this little chunk here. And I'll just read it. It may be very interesting to you to know that President Mr. Snow of the Mormon Church claims to have had a number of revelations very recently from heaven. To explain fully what these revelations are, it is necessary to know that we as a people believe that the Church of Jesus Christ has again been established through messengers sent from heaven. This church has as its head a prophet, seer, and revelator who gives to men God's holy will. Revelation is the means through which the will of God is declared directly and in fullness to men. These revelations are got through dreams of sleep or waking visions of the mind, by voices without visional appearance, or by actual manifestation of the holy presence before the eye. We believe that God has come in person and spoken to our prophet and revelator. So that book changed me quite a bit in that I started to wonder, the topic of Christ, where else is he mentioned in my own field of psychology? And I know he wasn't quite mentioned in my books, although one of the textbooks I use, The History of Psych, he's mentioned once. But where else is he that I don't know? So I started to read the founders of psychology and started to notice Jesus is mentioned quite a bit. Sometimes favorably, sometimes not favorably, but at least they mention him, and he is a topic which allows me to gain great confidence in my psych courses and bring it in. But also understanding that it's a topic relevant to science. In fact, when we look at science, it's been built by faith-based people, Christians, the science we practice today. And so that has opened to me the understanding that perhaps separating Christ and intellectual work is not the best thing to do. Perhaps it should be merged or with curiosity connected in some way. Maybe that's what I'll read for you today because that was a lot of reading. Thoughts, experiences, or questions you may have on conversion? Yeah.
Well, can I ask about William James?
Yeah.
As a just this person, I am surprised to hear him writing about religious experience. I guess maybe you can help me understand if he's talking about this in a observational way. It sounds like he's explaining religious conversion from the perspective of a believer who has had his own conversion, perhaps. Did I get that right from the things you read?
Yeah, I think he struggled a lot with religion personally, so that was of interest to him. So I think this book settled quite a few things for him, but that was quite a bit later in his life. So in his previous life, yeah, he's come in and out of religion, if you will.
Okay.
It's been a difficulty for him.
And what was the purpose of this book as a compilation? Was it explaining, just trying to understand how people come to conversion? What was he trying to do?
What he was trying to do is capture how humans connect to the divine. And how people experience it from a psychological perspective. And conversion being a center in that book, but there are other things he discusses as well besides. Yeah, it's interesting. But any thoughts on your own experience, perhaps, of what it means to be converted? I don't know if you ever thought about the ego, which we talk a lot in psychology about, the self, and the needing to, as a religious person, put Christ as the center, understanding that he will hold your ego a lot safer, perhaps, than you would. Any thoughts on that?
Speaking of the ego, I think of some struggles members of this church, friends, and myself have had with specifically giving credit to God and experiences and things that go right in your life. Do you have any thoughts on that? Psychologically, I guess.
Yeah. So I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You're talking about your, to an extent, personal experience and having difficulty assigning some of the things that have happened in your life to God. Is that correct? Good and bad.
Giving credit to God. So part of what you've been reading is surrendering that self, and you know how you talked about the self-help books and that self-focus.
Yeah. I'm not against self-help books, by the way.
No.
I'm careful with them.
But where, I guess, what's your personal experience with trying to both credit God, but also understanding that you've made a lot of progress and it doesn't have to be completely singular, like you did it all on your own versus God helped you along the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think from my perspective, I have a hard time setting apart what I do from what God does. I've come to understand that the energy that I use, the words the breath that I have is not mine, it's a gift. So I guess I'll say it this way, I'm tempted to glory God in all the good things that come out of it. Probably more blame myself when they don't come good instead of God. And I think there's definitely a place for you to understand that, yes, I've done this. Yes, I've overcome this. Yes, I have made this effort and it's paid out or not paid out. So I guess I'm not taking away the accountability that you and I have for the behavior that we do. But I will never take the accountability away from its redemptive probability if you turn to God and experience conversion. Am I making any sense? Am I touching on what you're saying, or did I miss?
Got it.
Is it okay?
I wouldn't say there's a strict answer for it.
Yeah,
It's just a thought.
It's a great thought, by the way. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Is the only measurement for conversion a subjective measurement? Is there, I mean, are there milestones or something that we can use to judge others or ourselves better?
So William James believed that religious experience are within the realm of subjectivity because they're so personal. So objective science will have a difficulty with it, and that's probably why in science we don't really cover it. But to address the subjective, you have to address the qualitative. And the qualitative methods, which are not popular in the United States for science. So the heritage of religious belief in science, to me, in the United States, has been lost mostly since the 1920s and 30s, and I'm going to blame Freud on that. The people that came after that, because they're all cut out religion. 1960s is probably where the axe came down definitively. It's when God, religion got out of our textbooks in our K-12 curriculum.
So although like it's super subjective, we read a lot of conversion accounts from the 18th century, 19th century in one of my lit classes, and there's always like similarities, and we compared them to Joseph Smith's.
Yeah.
And so although it's qualitative, it seems like some of those qualitative elements are the same throughout for Christian conversion at least.
Yeah.
So there's the falling into sin afterwards, or the temptation of the devil right before a moment of religious clarity.
Yeah.
So
I think we have a bias in the Western world of objective research is better, but phenomenology is an example of a subjective, if you will, qualitative method, which is just as scientific.
yeah.
Because it looks for patterns in experience instead of patterns in numbers. So objectivity will focus on numbers. Subjectivity will focus on words. But it's the same scientific work. So I like what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, and then Karen.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Dalton, but the surrender of the self, isn't that sort of the center of most Christian mysticism, and definitely like meditation in the East? Like that's, Francis and many of the Christian mystics, that's what their prayers and
Yeah.
daily endeavors are all about. And then, meditation is all about the death of self. It's like a lifelong journey we all go through, is keeping the ego quiet.
What you and I consider sage and wise in the readings that we do, where it comes from, has that flavor, if you will, or that theme of self-surrender. Yeah. And I'm absolutely for self-surrendering to God through Jesus Christ. Some other places you will see self-surrender to, and then they won't have the word God in Jesus Christ, but cosmos. That's a little closer to Buddhism, perhaps. Some of us self-surrender to ideology, and that's when I go, no. Some of us will self-surrender to another person. And I say, God will be safer. Serve the person. So be careful who you surrender to. I've seen the self do only 3 things well. One is self-surrender. One is self-worship, which I don't like, when you're the center of your world and top of your pyramid. And the third one, sadly, self-destruction through addiction or whatever else, or just taking yourself out. That's it, from what I can say. So my invitation today is for you to consider self-surrendering to God through the power of Jesus Christ. And I'm excited because that's still part of psychology. It's just been hidden in books. Never underestimate the power of books. There's another philosopher of science named Thomas Kuhn that said, if you want to change a system or a paradigm or a way to think, write a book, because books have changed people. Other things don't tend to have that kind of power. That's where I understand the power of Scripture, Book of Mormon, etc. Just the power of books, period. So read books. Yes.
And I don't really know how to form my question, but I'm thinking about this self and I'm thinking about, you talked about adolescence and this self-consciousness.
Yep.
So I'm thinking that before adolescence, a child is unself-conscious, doesn't focus on, children don't focus on, for example, what they look like or how they appear to other people. And so I'm wondering if, I'm sort of wondering why that happens, and I'm also wondering if the surrendering of the self also includes becoming a child again.
Yes, I think all of that is correct from a psych perspective. A child always understands herself in relation to a caregiver. So the self is co-defined with the context in which she finds herself. When she becomes a teenager, she wants to emphasize that individuality. In doing so, there's all these things I've described that are difficult, that you and I go through when we're teenagers. But then we find our dependence at a higher maturity, which is the dependence from the caregiver becomes placed into the dependence into our Heavenly Father or parents.
So it seems a really necessary process.
Yeah. It seems to me that that's the case. Yeah. Very much. Yeah.
Thinking a ton about this conversion process and reflecting on my own life as well. And I'm curious if there are levels of conversion too, like patterned in the temple. As we are converted, can you then be converted again up to the point where you are then dedicating your whole life to God? Where I think initially there's a different kind of conversion that happens, allowing God into your life first, or Christ into your life.
Yeah, I believe that's the case. I believe William James actually discusses that, in that for those of us for whom conversion happens over time, which is just about most of us, it's never like one huge deal. We will have levels of strong connection with God and conversion. Sometimes those actually become back to the periphery and we forget, depending on our choices, but our context, the influences we take. But it can come back, and it's a renewal, it's a new conversion. I like to think of the sacrament as renewal and new conversion, because you're different from last week. And so you do it again. So yes, I do think multiple conversions are important in our own lives. This recommitment. The Christian world, I think they like the word revival. I like the word conversion, reconversion. Any more thoughts on that ego? Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, it's kind of this conversion idea. How would you compare that to like Carl Rogers' idea of defining a person more as a becoming instead of a being? Because like his philosophy was like, instead of seeing a static person and then they go through therapy and now they're at a new static place, he's like, he came to think of them as just in process and continually in process, continually going towards Christ.
I like this from Carl Rogers, this continual self-actualization, other than he doesn't ask you to self-surrender. That's where I see the issue is with him. But I like the idea of self-flourishing, developing yourself, your talents, all of that. I think is really good. But sometimes it will distract you from your faith, because you could be so good at a gift that you think now you're the gift to mankind for whatever that gift may be, and you just forgot where it came from. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess like touching with that, I've had like kind of instilled in me the importance and the power of our eternal identities,
Yeah.
where we are children of God.
Yep.
and because of that, we're capable of becoming like him.
Yep.
So I sometimes have a hard time resolving this concept of, well, our eternal natures are incredibly divine, they're adaptive, they're capable of so much, but entirely reliant upon God to the point where it's like, well, why does it matter then? Because you think about like a child, they're dependent upon their parents, but they have so much potential that it's not till a certain point that they're able to start accessing and working on the potential in their own way. But I guess I just have a hard time resolving like was commented earlier, like when I do something good or I'm doing something well, I'm like, okay, can I even take any credit for that? Because I know there's a part of me that desires and longs to do that. Is there no credit there? Or does it all go to God? And maybe that's just my ego saying, well, that's the you need to anyway.
Yeah, it reminds me of a Mormon of a missionary who his brothers and friends were saying, hey, you're kind of being boastful. Like you're taking credit. It's like, no, I'm not taking credit, but I will rejoice in my God. I think the danger, Hunter, is in trying to intellectualize this. Intellectualize too much means trying to logically connect the dots. Be very careful with rationality because it could be what you self-surrender to. Everything making sense intellectually is not necessarily the full Christian path, although you can point to it. It'll never be enough, right? When Jesus asks you to bathe 7 times in the river, that's when your rational thought will fail, because that makes no sense. So yes, use your intellect, see where you fit in the plan of salvation, see if you can. And yeah, pay attention to the still small voice. I think this book has allowed me to understand what in relation to the scriptures and my faith, of course. That's probably how I understood that book best. Is that still small voice is much more important than we thought. So let me show you one way where the intellectual can trip you, from my understanding of the psychology I know, is trying to intellectually figure out what God or Christ wants you to do instead of talking to them. We do that a lot. Like, what would Jesus do? Well, if Nephi had asked himself that question in front of Laban, I think we would have a different one. Right? Be very careful with intellectualizing Christ or God. I would rather you experience him through the still small voice like now. Like, have a chat already. See how that goes. Try and trust the faithful word that come to your head. Whether you think they're from you or from God, if they're good, do it. You're probably going to get a second one right after who's going to say, no, don't do this, this is dumb. You don't know this person, why would you say hi? Whatever that is, try and go with the first more often than not. I think the gospel is more a gospel of experience than it is a gospel of intellectuals. I mean, I don't mind intellectuals again when they point to God, and I will use those skills for sure, but they're not enough. And too often people will use them to tempt you to get out of the church. And too often they don't know the weakness they have in their intellectual work. That was good. Thank you for being here. This is really nice. I enjoyed reading to you. Hopefully that wasn't too long. But I really loved your questions. I think that's where I got a lot from you. So thank you.
Thank you, Brother Duncan. I love to hear how all of these things happen. Like you say, books make it neat.
I know, like nothing else.
So, thank you. And so we'll have another book talk on the 20th of March. you're invited to, and thank you for coming. You better brownie on your way.
Yeah, have a good night, y'all.